Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the cryptoverse. This is your Tuesday update premium video. Hopefully you enjoy the content. Well, a couple days ago, we were speculating that we might have a nice start to the week, primarily because we've seen three red weekly candles in a row, and that we'd have to go all the way back to mid 2020 and also in 2019 to actually find periods where we got four red weekly candles in a row. At least so far, that is sort of shaping up to be somewhat true. We're up 4% on the week, but remember this, right? It doesn't mean a thing unless, as long as we're below these levels. Okay, the 20-week SMA, the 21-week EMA, because we don't even have the chance to hold it as support if we're just kind of trending below it. So you can kind of see that the Bitcoin is slowly moving higher. The bull market support band is slowly moving lower. Seems like we're getting squeezed here, and we're sort of building up to a breakout one way or the other. Okay, um, and this is why I said, even a couple days ago, the market is still very uncertain in the short term. The overall markets are still largely risk off. Okay, you haven't seen that flood of money come flocking back to risk on assets yet. Doesn't mean it won't, but we haven't seen it yet. And one of the things I think to think about when looking at something like this is to consider that we could have a bounce. We've had a bounce, a little bit of a bounce for ants, right? But a bounce nonetheless. We're back above $41,000, but just a couple days ago we were trading below 40K when we were talking about potentially getting a bounce. If the bounce continues to say the 20-week SMA, the 21-week EMA, it still means we might have a little bit more to go. But I think the main uncertainty here is going to come, and the parallel, right? The main parallel is to look at what happened the last time we saw market conditions like this. And again, remember, these things aren't going to play out necessarily the exact same way every single time, but it would at least be somewhat foolish not to acknowledge, these similarities here. And the reason we need to acknowledge this is because if Bitcoin comes up here and sort of has this phase where it gets one of those like weak little bounces where it sort of bounces off the trend line, but it doesn't pass the bull market support band and it doesn't make it to the 200-day SMA, if it starts to roll back down to the trend line like we did over here, back in 2018, if that trend line breaks, if it actually breaks and it's not just a wick, and we go put in a lower low, that's where you would see all Bitcoin valuations likely bleed. Okay, so that's the risk on the market. I just want people to understand what the risk is right now. No one has a crystal ball here. Obviously, it would be nice to see Bitcoin back above its 200-day moving average and back above the bull market support band, and it might play out. But the next couple of weeks, I think, are somewhat instrumental in figuring out what is this trend going to do. I mean, this week seems like we could get a bounce. So far, that's what we've seen. I mean, the bounce maybe would extend even into next week too, before we actually have to make a decision on what way we're headed. If you think about it, if you go look at the charts, the average daily gains in April, I mean, let's say, the last half of April, average returns tend to be green. Like on average, for Bitcoin in April tends to be green. And this is another reason why we're saying, hey, might not be the worst time. Might not be the worst time for Bitcoin as we get into the second half of April. But I still think the main question mark that I'm still trying to be patient for. I've said before, either show me Bitcoin strength or show me capitulation, right? I don't really care which one. Just show me one of them. And whenever one of those happens, I would gladly get more allocated into, say, the altcoin market. Now, right now, I'm still sitting on around 10% alts, not very heavily weighted at the moment. But the reason is I'm still wondering, how is this going to break? Is it going to break? Is it going to sort of break this trend line like in 2018 and put in a lower low? And then that's when if it puts in a lower low, then I imagine we'll just be talking about, well, technically it's still at the bottom part of the summer lull, and so therefore technically we're still going sideways. But I think that is the main risk on the market at the current time. Is it going to move back to the downside next month? Okay, so my strategy right now, is, again, is to be Bitcoin heavy, to have a cash position, and to be relatively light altcoins until we have a bit more direction. I would prefer to have some type of direction in this market than to just, before I get more heavily exposed into, say, the more risky altcoin market. All right. Now, one of the reasons why the market remains risk off, and because to some degree, it's like, all right, there's been all this positive developments for Bitcoin. I mean, obviously, some of the larger wallets have been buying, or some of the larger whales. We actually just put out a video earlier on whale number 3, who's been buying a decent amount. If you go to the Bitcoin rich list, you can see that. Oh, look at this, a recent development. Whale number 3 sold off 1,500 Bitcoin. I'm just now seeing this for the first time, but it looks like they did it around 41.4. Okay, so around 41.4, they transferred out 1,500 Bitcoin. But what you'll see is that they accumulate when the price goes down, generally, and then they start selling as it goes back up. And you can kind of see they're starting to do it yet again here at 41,447. So the thing that I'm watching is, yes, there are wallets that have been accumulating. You can go look at, say, like Luna's wallet as well. That one's been accumulating off and on. Obviously, MicroStrategy occasionally accumulates a few hundred million in Bitcoin. And you might ask yourself, well, despite all of this, why does the market still look so bad? I mean, obviously, we're up this week, so maybe people are short-term biased not to believe it's so bad. But look, why has the market just been overwhelmingly somewhat dull for the last several months? Again, the market remains risk off. And the reason the market remains risk off is you just go look at the dollar, and once again, you flip it over to these Heikin-Ashi candles on the monthly, right, on the monthly, and you can see the very strong uptrend. And I know these phases can last a long time, but this trend is something we've been following for a long time. And it has helped us understand over the last half year why it makes sense to have cash on hand. And if you think about it, I mean, having cash on hand hasn't been a bad thing. The market hasn't done anything, right? A lot of altcoins are actually still down against their Bitcoin valuations. A lot of them are down against the US dollar as well. And so, I think having, continuing to have some cash on hand, which, as you guys know, has been my strategy, still makes a lot of sense. What I'd like to see is I'd like to see some type of pullback by the dollar, looking into some blow off top or something like we've seen before, but we haven't necessarily seen that yet. And if you look at where the dollar has rallied in the past, you can see that the last time we rallied this high was March of 2020, when it went all the way up to like almost 103 in January of 2017, before that bull market started, where we went absolutely parabolic. We went from like 1K to 20K in a year. That topped at almost 104. And so I think the argument here is, while, we could come back up to test these levels, but in addition to that, one thing to consider is, in terms of like a macro thing, when looking at the dollar, it sort of seems like, to some degree, you have this move to the top and then back down to this trend line, and then here we broke through it, and then we had a back test of it, and this was in 2018. If you draw it a different way, right? If you draw it a different way, it might even be that, again, this move here was the 2017 bull market. So let me delete all these so I can highlight it a little bit better. So this was the 2017 bull market, and then this one was the 2020 bull market. So perhaps the next bull market for Bitcoin, again, I don't know how much you want to take lines on the charts of the bank, but if it continues to rally, perhaps it'll be back testing this line eventually, just like this one was a back test of this line as well. And remember, this bull market for Bitcoin occurred when the dollar was going down in 2017. This was in 2020. Perhaps the next one will be in 2023. But all I can say right now is, clearly the market still remains risk off, right? It still remains somewhat risk off. And I think it still makes sense to be relatively cautious under these market conditions. And as of today, the risk on Bitcoin is still at around 0.373. All right, so hasn't really done a whole lot. This is the risk band we spend the most amount of time in. We've talked about that as well. 0.3 to 0.4 risk band. It's like the most difficult risk band for a lot of people, because we always feel a little antsy. It's kind of like, all right, are we going to capitulate back down to the lowest risk levels? And so people are constantly wondering, should they save a majority of their cash for that, or are we just going to go back up the wristbands like we did in 2013 without revisiting the bottom wristband? So again, it's natural to feel the way you feel, where you have half of crypto Twitter being super bearish, half of crypto Twitter being super bullish, and everyone's sort of just wondering which way it's going to go. I'd argue once again that the best strategy right now, in my opinion, is being Bitcoin heavy and having cash on hand. Look, I have some ETH and I have some alts, but I'm certainly not super heavy in either of those right now, because I would like to see a little bit more strength from Bitcoin. Do remember that even if we do emulate 2013 in terms of the risk levels, we could still come back down to the 0.3 risk level, more or close to it, just like we did in 2013. After going from 0.3 to 0.4 risk, going all the way back down, we could still do something like that, which would mean that Bitcoin could go back to the low to mid 30K region, right? I mean, it could mean that it goes back to that level one more time, if that were to play out. I think the danger is that if it goes, say, to 32K or 31K, then you're looking at a lower low from this most recent trend. And then we can no longer really stand on the idea that we're just putting in macro higher low. So right now it's true. Bitcoin has just been putting in higher low after higher low after higher low. So this is why a lot of people are saying, there's no reason to be that fearful. But we were also doing the same thing in 2018 until we weren't. And so that's why I just want people to be aware that this sort of chart pattern has existed before in 2018. And that should help explain why I'm light on altcoins. If you think that, if you're convinced that it's going to play out in a different manner, which it could, then perhaps you want to take on a little bit more risk and be heavier in alts. But I'm just trying to communicate why I am light on alts right now. And it's basically just seeing similar price action to what we've seen before, and just wanting really Bitcoin to show some strength here. Okay, I mean, I still think that Bitcoin's not really doing anything for the first half of this year in terms of to the upside potential. I mean, obviously to the downside is fair game. We said it's likely going to be bearish over the first half of the year, neutral at best. So technically we're in an uptrend right now. If we close Q2 above the yearly open at 46K, I would consider that a huge win. All right, I'm just not expecting it to happen. Right, I'm just expecting it to happen. So try to hang in there. Do remember that these phases always exist, right? I mean, we've the crypto investors, we've experienced this many times before. This is not the first time, and if we do spend many more months just sort of chopping around, it's the price you pay, right? I mean, it's ultimately the price you pay to hopefully see the gains back up to the upside one day. So try and be patient and understand that these things can take a while to play out, right? I mean, they simply can. The fair value on the asset class is now at approximately 1.599 trillion, and we're currently sitting at 1.887 trillion, which represents an approximate overvaluation of 18%. So slightly overvalued with respect to the fair value trend line, and we've just been riding that trend line for a while. And again, the fair value of Bitcoin, according to the Fit to All data, is just above $36,000. The Fit to non-bubble data puts it just over $21,000. So you can clearly identify what the risk is in the market right now, right? The risk is capitulation back to the fair value band, Fit to non-bubble data, and the bull thesis is, can we hold the line in the fair value band like we were able to do in 2013, right? Because that's what we did in 2013. So you should understand the risk on the market. That's the main goal here, is just to kind of know where we are, to understand what the downside risk is. If there's some type of a move back to the downside, you hopefully can understand what that risk is, but also recognizing the upside potential. And really this whole thing is just about risk management, right? I mean, with respect to Bitcoin, we still sort of sit in no man's land. We are closer at least to the bottom regression band than the top. The price now on Bitcoin is like 41K, and the upper part of the lower bound regression is approaching $32,000, whereas at the top we have to go all the way about to 90K. So clearly we're closer to the bottom regression band than the top, and so but overall I'd still argue we're more or less sitting in no man's land. I was looking at some interesting things, like so I noticed that Wikipedia page views for a lot of these different cryptocurrencies actually spiked somewhat recently, which I thought was somewhat interesting. But I was looking at some of the on-chain data, and one of the things I was looking at was the transfer volume, and sort of just looking at say like the 50-day SMA of it, and it's kind of coming through here, seeing ETH is going down. but also noticing that Cardano is really high, is really moving up right now. So you can at least see some people are really starting to explore this network. I mean, look, I get all the FUD behind Cardano. I'm not going to sit here and defend it to the end of the earth, but at least you can see there's some activity on the chain. I will say if Bitcoin stays bearish, a lot of these altcoins aren't going anywhere. Okay, it doesn't matter what really happens on the chain, as long as Bitcoin is still sort of in like a bearish phase. I don't think any altcoin is going to go anywhere in any sustainable manner right now until we see Bitcoin showing a bit more strength. But I did think this was an interesting piece of information that a lot of people might be missing, and that's that the transfer volume on Cardano is up significantly recently. I mean, if you break it down into, say, just the raw data, I mean, it has pulled back a little bit recently. Maybe a shorter term moving average could show that, but still, it's up a lot. And it looks a lot different than say, and here's the 90-day estimate of it. These charts look a lot different than some of the other ones. Like if you look at Polkadot, it's actually been in a downtrend. You look at Ethereum, it's been in a downtrend. You look at Algorand, I don't even know. I mean, I haven't looked at it. It's been in a downtrend. Tezos, I imagine it's in a downtrend, right? So a lot of these are really seeing downtrends in a lot of these activity. Looks like Ripple is up a lot recently. I mean, I was curious about that. I've seen some people talking about it. But one of the things to remember is that even though there can be bullish signs in when the market is bearish, they won't actually, I don't think you'll see that manifest in the price until Bitcoin is back to being bullish again. So again, that is in fact still the main risk on the market. From a social metrics perspective, right? If you look at like new YouTube subscribers and whatnot, you can kind of see it's still relatively low. In fact, you can also sort of see here that there's actually been some losses recently to some of the channels, and that's nothing against their content or anything. I myself have seen YouTube subscribers slow down a lot over the last several months. Okay, so this is just sort of a showing that new retail investors are simply not here right now. They're just not. And that's always best reflected to some degree in the HODL waves. And just to recognize that, listen, when long-term holders are up, like we are right now, when the long-term holder is up, obviously the market still remains bearish. And we don't tend to see it break it back up to the upside for a few months at the very least. So you could argue that we're potentially in the second half of this sort of really long, grueling phase for Bitcoin, but it could still last for a few more months before we break back out of it and start moving back up in a sustainable manner. It could still last a while. So we need to consider that and look at this chart and say, if you look at short-term holders, what do you see, right? What do you see when you look at short-term holders? The peaks occur to the actual peaks or slightly after, right? But the peaks occur to the peaks. When it's down like this, I mean, it basically means that new retail just simply, they're not interested. Bitcoin has this cruel way of bringing people into the market during mania phases. It then punishes them for a while. And then those people that stick around get to benefit in the next mania phase. And a lot of people just sort of get bored and move on. So I would encourage you to try to stick around if you can, even though I know the market is really boring right now. But to really hunker down in projects that you think will stand the test of time. And I think having a healthy Bitcoin and Ether position is one of the best things you can do. Even if they do end up having a capitulation, those are the two most likely ones to reach new all-time highs. And so those are your safest bets during the market, during this phase of the market. Looking at the supply and profit and loss, I was also thinking about how you could sort of argue these are higher lows, but the danger is, you could also look at it like this and say this is a lower low, and that this might be a higher low over here. So this is why I keep thinking to myself, and I keep trying to prepare people. Look, I think we're going to have some type of inflection point soon. The reason I say that is because we don't tend to ride the fair value forever, okay? You can look at what's happened previously. We either hold it and bounce out of it, or we capitulate below, and we're still sort of riding that line, right? We're still riding that line right now. So I do think we're going to see some type of a resolution soon, which really, if you think about it, no matter what way it breaks, it gives you something actionable to do. If it breaks up to the upside and Bitcoin starts showing strength, then obviously altcoins are probably going to do well. They tend to rally after Bitcoin goes parabolic. if we break to the downside, that gives a lot of opportunities on the altcoin market because, I've been pretty skeptical about buying altcoins for a while now. But if you think about what happens if there is some type of continued correction, that's where you can actually get a lot of good deals on altcoins, and then you ride that into say like a future cycle. So that's where we currently are, the sort of the state of the market as it stands right now. And you can see the Bitcoin risk is 0.373. One of the things we followed is that fear and greed index, and looking at the 90-day estimate of it. And I mean, you can see that it's rolling over a little bit here. So it still somewhat seems reminiscent of the second half of 2018, which is why I still want people to remain relatively cautious. You should consider too that, considering that the weekly RSI of Bitcoin has been in a downtrend since early 2021, I think the thing is, and this is something I've thought about a lot, there's this constant battle on Twitter, right? As whether it's a bull market or a bear market. At the end of the day, call it what you want to call it, right? It doesn't really matter. It's whatever you think it is. It can be what it is. I mean, if on shorter time frames, you can be something different than on longer time frames. You zoom out on Bitcoin, you just call it a decade-long bull market. You zoom in on yearly time frames, and obviously you're going to have some bear markets mixed in with the bull markets. Call it what you want to call it, but when you look at things like weekly RSI, we've been putting in lower high after lower high so far, right? So far. So one thing I've thought about is, there are a lot of people that are still calling it a bull market, which again, it's fine if they want to call it that. But imagine if they eventually do call it a bear market. By the time they call it a bear market, the bear market might be over, right? I mean, you can kind of see like after it goes through this phase, eventually it sort of turns back around. So imagine someone finally does admit it's a bear market or something. Like imagine Bitcoin does pull back down and puts in a lower low. And maybe we do just hold the summer low, right, without capitulating to the 200-week SMA or something. Even with going to a lower low from this most trend line, most recently. If people finally call it a bear market right there, I mean, it could be that the bear market is finally over. Or if it capitulates below that and it goes even lower, maybe then people would call it a bear market. But then it's like, well, congratulations, you're calling it a bear market after we just had a year of a bear market, and now it's actually time to switch back to being bullish. Okay, so that is the thinking. And looking at, again, the US dollar is in a pretty brutal uptrend right now. You make no mistake about it, it's still in a pretty brutal uptrend. And so what we're looking for is we're looking for this to come back the other way. And once it comes back the other way, or at least cools off some, then you're looking at potentially going back risk on. But right now, it's still in a strong macro uptrend, and so I don't think we're risk on right now. I think the capitulation will occur if the overall market just continues to remain risk off month after month after month. Like if it keeps going on for many more months, then eventually the market just can't handle it anymore, and then it goes to, say, a new low, and then we have to figure out, okay, now can it support these prices? But what I really want to focus on, though, is really kind of honing in on the US dollar and thinking about what is the US dollar doing, how overheated is it getting. You can see on the weekly time frame it is getting into that overbought territory, and really it has already gone higher on the weekly RSI than it ever did back in 2018. I mean, look at this. It's more reminiscent of what happened in 2014, which lasted approximately, I believe, 10 months or so, right? About 10 months. In this one so far, we've seen this go on for about 9 months. So what I'm looking at here is, maybe a few more months of the dollar continuing this rally. But eventually, I do think it'll have some type of a pullback, and that's when you'll probably see Bitcoin start to surge again. Remember, the news just simply does not matter. I mean, it matters in the sense that we know adoption is occurring, and it sort of supports the thesis that the asset class will trend up with time as more and more people use it. But in say these shorter term local moves, the news just simply does not matter when you're just risk off, right? When the overall market as a whole is risk off. So what I'm watching right now and over the next couple of weeks is Bitcoin is sort of having this recoil off of the 40K level. We are bouncing back up to the bull market support band. And the question are we going to just simply get rejected by it like we have already a few times, or can we actually break through? If we break through, then we actually have something more to talk about. If we just sort of sit below it like we have been, then nothing really substantial has occurred. Okay, so I just want people to understand kind of where we are, the fact that we're facing that same type of a bounce off of the uptrend channel after getting rejected off the 200-day SMA. And the main risk on the market right now is if we get rejected by the bull market support band again, and we come, say, back down to this downtrend channel, and if we break through it and put in a lower low, that's where all Bitcoin valuations bleed. If we hold it and get back above the bull market support band and then kind of hold it as support, then you're going to see that strength return back to the market. But I think it would need to be also supported by the dollar rolling over and coming back down. That's what we would like to ideally see in order to sort of support a more bullish local thesis. In the short term, I said earlier this week on Sunday, I think this week could be easily a green week. I don't know if it's going to close green, but at least it's open green so far, which sort of is like the gut reaction after seeing such a large sell-off over 3 days, is to kind of see it push back up a little bit. So I think there's still a good chance we close the week green. Next week, we're getting a little iffy, but maybe. I mean, April does tend to be a good month. And based on what we've seen with Bitcoin in April, generally speaking, the worst month we've ever seen is negative 3% or so. We were sitting at like negative 12% not that long ago. Now it's moved back up a little bit to negative 9. So, you could maybe we get that rally to get it closer to -3, -4% or something by the end of the month. But Bitcoin still has a lot of work to do. And I sit here and look at the market and see the risk on or the risk off environment. And I still just can't help but want to be cautious and to reiterate the same thing we've been talking about. Listen, the way you can make your money in this asset class is to not constantly FOMO in on every single move, but to have a cash position and use it as a position of strength to buy up dips or to DCA into altcoins once the market looks more healthy. Remember, I know a lot of altcoins can get local bounces off whatever their most local low recently was, but they're still down significantly over the last several months for the most part. So I just want people to be patient and to recognize this is a long-term game. In a couple of years, you'll probably look back at this and just be like, why weren't you more patient, right? You just be patient, and the market will sort of, slowly reveal itself in a more obvious way. Until then, I think the general strategy remains, for me anyways, is being Bitcoin heavy. I have some ETH and some alts, but relatively light bags there, and a nice cash position. I like to see what happens as we get into the end of April and as we go into May. I think this is going to be very interesting to see what Bitcoin does. It seems like we're coming to an inflection point where we're either going to get a capitulation over the next couple of months, or we'll see some type of a strength bounce off the fair value. So let's just be a little bit patient and see what happens there. I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up there. Thank you guys for tuning in. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.